Here we go!
I want to preface this video with a bit of context. Mario Kart is not my favorite racing game series. Far from it, really. I certainly enjoyed my time with the previous games, and I've poured plenty of hours into Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but I don't come back to it a lot, at least not on my own time. I'm someone who's more into racing games with skill as the main focus, which is pretty obvious from my previous videos. Nonetheless, I knew that despite my bias in racing games, I was certain that Mario Kart World would still be an enjoyable experience. Mario Kart 8 was basically the peak of the series thus far, with a good balance of items, excellent course design, and remarkable production values despite being a Wii U game from 2014. So with Mario Kart World, at the very least, I expected it to be just as good as its predecessor. I knew that I wouldn't spend hundreds of hours playing it, but I knew it would keep me entertained with the numerous courses, unlockables, and the iconic chaotic items. Through a few trailers and a whole direct presentation, the open world would be a major selling point of the game, and personally I wasn't all too excited about it. What I was excited about was the addition of wall riding and rail grinding. This could expand all the opportunities of shortcuts and tricks throughout all the courses, which would probably mean a higher skill ceiling for the game. And given that the production values seemed much higher than Mario Kart 8, I was sure that World would be a good time. And to cut to the chase, it was not as good as I thought it would be. But I don't want to rag on the game entirely. There are some great things about Mario Kart World that I want to go over first. Easily, the best things about this game are its music and art direction. Everything is just much more vibrant and alive than they were back in 8 Deluxe. Comparing characters between World and 8 is a great example of that. Most characters also get a bunch of costumes to wear, which was practically a shoo-in given all the costumes available in Mario Kart Tour. The karts themselves have this bounciness and physicality to them that makes them very appealing to see in motion, whether it's jumping, drifting, or being hit by something. All of the tricks, particle effects, and even the large bodies of water just look really stunning. It's one of the aspects of the game that are nearly flawless. I only have two minor issues, one being that the day and night cycles are pretty stilted. Since all shadows and lighting are baked into the environment, there's no dynamic shadows and thus no dynamic lighting for the day and night cycle. So to hide this, the game just quickly transitions from day to sunset to night with no gradual sunset or sunrise. It's basically just an instant switch between 4 times of day. My second issue is that some characters get a lot of costumes while others get like 1 or 2. I get not giving enemies and NPCs costumes, but why does Pauline, DK, Shy Guy, and Lakitu get so little? Pauline and DK definitely deserve more than just 1 costume. But again, these are minor gripes. The entire game is visually excellent overall. The music is also great as a whole. There's plenty of new tracks along with older tracks returning as remixes. There's also a lot of music to listen to, like so much that I probably haven't heard all of them yet. What's even better is the large variety of genres that the game covers, which is exactly how 8 Deluxe handled things. It was great then, and it's still great now, so I'm glad things haven't changed in that regard. And although I haven't listened to everything yet, I can't say I've heard anything that I've outright disliked. I can recall maybe 1 or 2 tracks that could have got my nerves, but they usually cut short before they got annoying. There's a lot of music, and a lot of it's good. I can't say much more than that. But that just leaves the gameplay, which is a big mixed bag in my opinion. Let's go over some of the better stuff first. Tricks can now be done multiple times in the air, and it doesn't have to be from any specific ramps. As long as you have some airtime, you can do tricks. This makes them much more convenient and fun to do, especially with multiple tricks instead of just the one in previous games. It's one of those features I actually miss when heading back to 8 Deluxe, so I'm hoping it's kept for future games. Items are now held behind you automatically, so there's no need to hold the item button anymore. Feathers are now obtainable in races, which means those in higher places can access certain shortcuts without needing a mushroom. That's something I really appreciate, so that front running means I can actually do something instead of just holding a shell behind my back the entire race. It also has some utility since you can decide to use it as a defensive item to dodge something or a shortcut item to jump over off roads. It's surprisingly useful as a weaker item. The course design for all tracks is done fairly well. Not all of them are great, but I feel like most of them are fun to drive through. There's still a mix of new tracks and retro tracks, with no real issues from either side. I love how Mario Circuit is laid out, as each lap follows a different circuit from the SNES original. Lap 1 is Mario Circuit 1, Lap 2 is Circuit 2, and Lap 3 is Circuit 3. DK Spaceport has a really cool layout, Boo Cinema has you enter the theater screen, and Bowser's Castle has a challenging segment with permanent boost. Just like the visuals though, I do have some issues with a few tracks. Water sections have very sluggish controls, and it makes me dislike tracks like Salty Speedway or Wario's Shipyard because of their lengthy water segments. Desert Hills is painfully bland, Koopa Troopa Beach is a small uninteresting circle, and unfortunately, Rainbow Road is probably one of the most boring tracks in the game because of its shallow course design and lack of any real challenge. It's like N64's Rainbow Road times 4, which is a huge disappointment because I really like how the track looks, but its layout is extremely dull. With the retro tracks, I might be misremembering, but some of them are a lot smaller than their originals, which feels odd and a bit underwhelming. It's most noticeable in Toad's factory. Not only are some rooms and hallways smaller than usual, but the final part with the 2 boost pads and big ramp is much smaller than the original. They even replaced the big boost ramp with some small kiddie ramp. It's not a major problem, but it's just a weird design choice to make them smaller than usual. It's even more odd because they increased the max player count from 12 to 24, so now there's even less space for everyone to race in. And that's where I get into the more complex issues of the game. The increase from 12 to 24 players sounds insanely chaotic, and that's because it is for the most part. If you're not within the top 3 or so, you're fighting for your life against 20 other players with a bunch of powerful items. But if you are in the top 3, it'll feel like nothing's really changed. In reality though, the change to 24 players means that it's a lot more likely for everyone to fight off each other while you're still cruising in first place. There's been many times, both offline and online, where I've sat in first or second place for the entire race, simply because everyone else behind me was too busy fending off each other. And if you're in the middle of the pack, it sometimes feels impossible to get out of there. I know that's been a part of Mario Kart before, but with double the players, it feels like it takes double the effort to actually jump ahead of everyone, assuming you're not sandbagging, which I'll certainly get to later. The other parts I'm mixed on are the racing modes, Grand Prix, Free Roam, and Knockout Tour. The Grand Prix is your standard affair, just 4 races or 4 different tracks. However, the standard 3-lap formula has been changed so that after the first track is done with, you'll have to drive to the next track through a long route. After 2 laps are spent on that route, you'll only spend 1 lap on the actual track, and then you repeat that for the rest of the Grand Prix. That's already a pretty jarring change, but what makes it worse is that the routes themselves are, 90% of the time, completely barren. They have shallow turns, barely have any obstacles or gimmicks, and remove any potential for skillful driving. That means all the focus is on the items, which basically cuts the entire game's appeal in half for me. While items can be fun, it's also the course design and the challenge in driving that adds to it. Without that, you're left with a pretty bare bones gameplay loop, which is how most of the routes are designed. There's not much you can do outside of use items, collect some coins, and maybe draft behind someone else. This is probably the most times I've drafted in any Mario Kart game because there's really not much to do on these routes. And since 1 lap is spent on most of the main tracks, they don't really get much time to leave an impression. Not only can it be laughably short for tracks like Koopa Troopa Beach, but it also cuts off certain courses that would have multiple sections or changes the course entirely. Peach Stadium turns into a boring rectangle when you drive to it in the Shell Cup. Crown City usually has 3 different sections to race through over 3 laps, but gets cut down to a single section of the course, which massively undermines the quality of the course as a whole. There's a few times where you might race through a track in reverse, but I can only recall doing that once or twice, and I'm not even sure if that was in any Grand Prix Cups. The Grand Prix races just aren't as good as before. I appreciate trying something new, but sacrificing gameplay for the novelty of driving to the next course just isn't worth it. As for Free Roam, you can explore the open world surrounding the courses and routes, with medallions and question panels to find. Alongside those are P-switches, which provide short missions just like Mario Kart DS. And while this all sounds great, the world feels remarkably empty to explore. The courses are the main attractions, but everything else in between doesn't have enough to really keep my interest. I'm glad to see missions return in some form, but having to explore this empty world for them is a lot less convenient than selecting them from a menu. If I only want to play some missions, I have to sift through a lot of empty roads and fields just to try some of them. But the worst part about Free Roam are the terrible rewards it gives. Finding collectibles and beating missions all unlock stickers that you can place on your cart. But you can only place 1 sticker on your cart, and it's always in a predetermined place that you can't choose. And sometimes that placement is so obscured or hard to see that it's nearly impossible to tell where your sticker is, even less so in races. This makes it so that there's barely any reason to explore the open world outside of just cruising around and relaxing, which, to be fair, I think is a decent reason to try out the open world. Just driving around while listening to the game's amazing soundtrack is a fairly cozy experience. But I'm sorry, if I want to explore and relax, I don't think I'd boot up Mario Kart looking for that experience. I play Mario Kart to race against others with wacky items. Free Roam is a decent addition and something that has potential, but needs a lot of work with its rewards and content. Moving on to Knockout Tour, this is an elimination style race where everyone drives through 5 routes with a track at the end. With each lap, players are slowly eliminated, cutting down the 24 racers down to a final 4 on the last lap. And conceptually, I think this is a really cool idea, but because most of the race is spent on routes, it's a lot of boring driving paired with heavy item play. And again, while items are fun, it's just not as fun without the normal courses. This is also where sandbagging becomes a much more prominent strategy, especially in online races. Once a checkpoint gets close, everyone in the back spams their best items, and that leaves everyone at the front all the way in last. Again, I know sandbagging's always been in Mario Kart, but it's practically one of the best, if not the only strategy when it comes to racing on routes, because there really isn't much to do otherwise. Besides, I don't enjoy sandbagging as a strategy, so I'm left to just deal with it because the game gives me nothing else to work with. There's this one rally and knockout tour that I feel highlights my problems with it. In order to get the best rank of 3 stars for each rally, you need to place first through all checkpoints. But since there's not much you can do outside of use items, you can be left in a bit of a stalemate sometimes. In the Spiny Rally, I was stuck trying to get first place at the very first checkpoint. I had to reset countless times because there would always be some CPU with better items, or maybe I just got terrible items and couldn't do much with them. There were only 3 sets of item pickups to use, so my chances of getting items at all were pretty limited. There was nothing I could do to be faster than everyone else. It was all up to the items and just hoping I'd get something useful, which felt out of my control and completely unfair. It took at least 30 minutes of attempts before I finally got first place by the first checkpoint, but it never felt like I earned it. I know that Mario Kart can be pretty heavy on luck at times, but this was a case where it was practically all luck, which at that point, I might as well be gambling. Knockout Tour is a great idea, just not at its best because of the boring routes that you have to play on. I like the idea of an elimination mode, and with a new 24 player cap, it feels like the best mode for it. But I'd much prefer playing it on actual tracks instead of only routes. As it is now, Knockout Tour can be fun, but most of the time it's just okay. And finally, one of the most disappointing parts of Mario Kart World is unfortunately the wall ride and grinding systems. Now I think conceptually this is a really cool mechanic. Being able to jump on any wall or grind rail to reach new areas is awesome both for visual flair and mechanical depth. It opens the possibilities of new routes and shortcuts that may take more map knowledge or better skills to reach properly. And as someone who prefers that type of design, I was on board with the idea. But in execution though, a lot of wall rides and grind rails just aren't really worth taking. The new routes given to you are rarely ever faster than just taking the normal routes. It's either just as fast as driving normally or is slower than the normal paths. And while some shortcuts have been discovered that are actually faster, they're usually unintended and either way too obscure or extremely precise, posing a significant difficulty jump from the intended shortcuts. And I've seen the argument that most of the rail or wall ride shortcuts aren't faster because they keep you separated from the chaos on the main road, keeping you safe and maintaining your current placement. And if they're slower, they usually provide items and coins as compensation. But personally, I'd always prefer to stay in my current placement rather than slow down for some items. It just feels like an odd payoff to me. And for routes keeping you away from other racers, I understand that trade-off, but I feel like that's not a very interesting or enticing reward over just giving me a slightly faster route. It doesn't help that some wall rides or rail grinds end with a big jump, and since there's a lot of air drag, you'll slow down to a crawl waiting to finally hit the floor. I get that they design it this way because they need to keep things balanced. This is still Mario Kart we're talking about, and it needs to be accessible to everyone. But it's such a letdown that most of the rail grinding and wall riding just keeps you in the same place or lower. I know there's a handful of shortcuts that are definitely faster, and pulling off some of them are fairly obvious and accessible, but the rest of them are either insanely strict or something so out of the way that only speedrunners would really know about them. I desperately wanted to love this system because it's such a cool idea on paper, but I feel like it still needs some work. I'd still want them to keep wall riding and rail grinding, but with some adjustments so that the routes offered don't slow you down or simply keep you away from other racers. It's still a decent incentive, but not strong enough to have me interact with the mechanics. The only time I heavily interacted with the mechanics like rail grinding was mainly through routes, because I know that they're slightly faster. Speaking of routes, now's the time I get into the worst parts of the game. At this point, everyone's familiar with the routes, and I've already talked about them earlier. They're too long, too shallow, and too frequent to even be considered as a good part of the game. Any gimmicks are completely absent, there's no challenge in the course design, and the only thing you can really do is draft behind others and use items. When people start comparing them to actual freeways, I feel that basically proves how boring they are. What makes them worse is that they're basically present in most if not all game modes. They're included in the Grand Prix, Knockout Tour is almost entirely route driving, and they're partially present in battle mode. Remove the routes and I think the game would be much better almost instantly. Speaking of battle mode, for some reason it's been downgraded from the amazing 8 Deluxe version to the sloppy unfinished version from the original Mario Kart 8. The dedicated arenas are just parts of normal tracks and routes, and the only modes you can play are Balloon Battle and Coin Runners. The 3 other modes from 8 Deluxe are completely gone. Not to mention that Big Donut and Chain Chomp Desert are both the same big circle arenas, which are very dull to play on. I don't know why they made battle mode like this, but it feels like such an afterthought with barely any substance to it. Mario Kart World also changed how you unlock characters and costumes. Some characters can be unlocked through Grand Prix Cups, but the rest have to be discovered through a random Kamek item, or through dash foods in the case of costumes. For the costumes, it's something you'll probably unlock over time, but trying to get all of them is a long and tedious process, since I think certain costumes are only unlockable in specific areas of the world map. And as for unlocking characters through Kamek, it's basically a roll of the dice. Not only is it random if someone will get the Kamek item, but it's also random what character you'll change into. So if you transform into someone you've already unlocked, it's back to rolling another Kamek item and hoping for the best. Again, it's another interesting change that Mario Kart World makes, but it's one that's worse than before. Unfortunately, the online play is also pretty rough in Mario Kart World. Not only is sandbagging a much more prevalent strategy as I mentioned before, but there's also the usual Nintendo Online jank. Players can swerve side to side unnaturally fast for some reason, landing a hit on players might not slow them down, and disconnects are still bound to happen every so often. The way races are handled is definitely a bigger problem though. When choosing a course for normal races, you're usually given 4 options with one being random. However, some of the tracks that aren't random may require you to drive to that course too, meaning that you'll spend 2 laps on routes and 1 lap on the actual track. The only way to avoid driving on routes is either hoping that the game offers a routeless track, or pick random and hope it gives a similar option. This is another terrible change that I don't really like. What made it worse was an update that made choosing random a lot more likely to choose a track with routes. And once backlash came from the changes, another update dropped which presumably changed it back to choosing routeless tracks more often. But even with the workaround of choosing random, it still means I rarely get an option to choose my preferred track, because most of the time, it'll be connected to a route. And at that point, I'd rather play any other track just to avoid it, which says a lot when most of the community shares the same opinion. A lot of people made it clear that they don't like to play with routes online, so the community resorted to using a Discord server to group up with others as a way to get the normal 3-lap races they wanted. And bottom line, if people need to resort to external apps just to avoid a major part of your game, then there's a serious problem that needs fixing. What doesn't help is the restrictive, almost archaic design choices that plague Mario Kart World in its entirety. There's a lack of certain options or quality of life features that you'd normally expect to see. The character select screen has all costumes as separate character slots instead of being confined in submenus. The world map initially marked nothing on the map for you, and you wouldn't be able to tell if you even collected everything. There's still no options for any in-game button remappings, alongside no accessibility options, no music player for all the amazing music, not even basic volume sliders are available. In a game that costs $80, there is somehow no music and sound options. And that right there is my biggest problem with Mario Kart World as a whole. The cost of $80 is simply far too high of a price, not just for games as a whole, but especially for what Mario Kart World offers. Now I know pricing for a game is a controversial topic, but plenty of people are still on the fence for a game being $70. To have the jump to $80 so soon is way too much to pay, with Mario Kart World being a terrible example of it, because there's already a much better and cheaper alternative with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Everything that Mario Kart World does, outside of the music and visuals, is just worse than what 8 Deluxe did. The Grand Prix, the battle mode, the online play, just everything surrounding the gameplay feels like a step back from the standards that 8 Deluxe set. Even if Mario Kart World was priced at $70, $60, or even $50 with the Switch 2 bundle, I'd still recommend 8 Deluxe over it. And if you still consider the booster course pass from 8 Deluxe, raising the game's price to $85, it'd still be much more worth it than Mario Kart World because you'll have a total of 96 tracks to play on, the most in the entire series, with no empty world or routes to deal with. As it is now, Mario Kart World just isn't worth it in my opinion. There's a lot of great ideas that are certainly interesting, but most of them just aren't very fun in execution. Granted, this is still Mario Kart, so you're bound to enjoy yourself to some degree, but there needs to be a lot more work in terms of the gameplay. And there actually is some work being done through some game updates. The world map was updated to show your collectibles and their locations. A few routes on water were altered to have some extra turns and gimmicks. Koopa Troopa Beach has also been given a second lap after driving to it on routes. Custom items have also been added, allowing Kamek and character unlocks to be much faster. And there's a new music option which can only make the music louder. And look, I really do appreciate the extra effort and how they're addressing feedback, but some of these things I expected to see day one. Custom items were already in 8 Deluxe through updates, so they should have been here from the start. World map icons are basic features that every open world has, and the fact that they needed to be added in after almost 4 months is ridiculous. Adding some turns and objects to the routes is nice, but they're still dreadfully boring compared to the actual tracks. And adding a bare bones music option that only switches between normal and loud is pathetic. I also don't think it's fair to expect me to wait for updates to fix the game when you're asking me to spend $80 on it up front. If I'm paying that kind of money, I expect those features from the start. I also expect features that were already in 8 Deluxe. There's still no music player, no 200cc, Funky Kong, Diddy Kong, Koopalings, or other battle modes. If those are added in future updates and maybe if some problems are addressed, the game would definitely be better off. But even if that does happen, which I'm not really expecting, the core game itself has a lot of problems built into it that may never get fixed in the long run. I really do hope Mario Kart World becomes a much better game, because I feel like its ideas have great potential. But at its current price and its current state as of making this video, it's something I'd completely avoid in favor of its predecessor. The music and visuals are nearly perfect, but I feel like the gameplay has too many problems that I just can't ignore. The routes are terribly bland and feel like padding, the open world provides the bare minimum in content, battle mode is terribly shallow, and online races are so persistent with routes that it forced the community to group up through Discord. If you really need to play Mario Kart World, either wait for a big discount or get it through that Switch 2 bundle if it's even still available. The Mario Kart World bundle was listed as a limited time offer, but they might be changing that in the future. Still, if you're on the fence or might want to get a Switch 2 for it, I'd heavily suggest you skip over it for now. It's not worth the price at the moment, and it's certainly not worth buying a new console for. Anyways, that's all I've got to say on this game. After waiting so long for a new Mario Kart, it's unfortunate that it turned out this disappointing. If you own the game yourself, maybe you agree with me or have a different opinion. I know there's plenty of people who enjoy it, and I'm glad they're happy with it. It's just too bad that I'm not one of them. But regardless, thanks for watching this far, subscribe and do all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you later.